if you knew what that meant. If people start talking about things that happen in commercial properties, if you were intelligent and could have a conversation there. And then again, the last thing which I mentioned before is I'm trying to hopefully stir you that you can realize anybody can own commercial real estate. It's a tremendous investment opportunity. And even if you've never thought about it before, hopefully that seed gets planted. There's two main differences when it comes to commercial versus residential real estate, and those are found in the use and in the build out. We talk about residential, the use is simple. You need somewhere to live, correct? And the build out's fairly simple too. You might have differences in the quality or the location or the size, et cetera, as I mentioned below, but the fundamentals are pretty simple. Everyone wants a bedroom, a kitchen, a living room, a bathroom, et cetera. The differences of commercial real estate are found in the use and the build out. And commercial real estate gets very, very specialized, right? We start talking about different types of commercial real estate, and it goes beyond here, but here's the main categories. You have office, you have medical or healthcare. That's the industry that I work predominantly in. You get into retail. That'd be concepts like a Walmart or a Wendy's or a Chick-fil-A, the stuff that you guys see as you drive around gas stations, et cetera. You get into industrial. Industrial is one of the largest product categories. Industrial is actually where I started my commercial real estate career. Spent a couple years grinding in industrial, and that's where I cut my teeth in real estate, actually. You get into concepts like land, multifamily. Prior to me getting into brokerage, I was in multifamily for years, managing apartment complexes. It's a tremendous investment opportunity. Then you get into stuff like self-storage, automotive, et cetera. And so I talked to a gentleman a few months ago, and all of a sudden he was just going about his business. He was doing things that he'd been doing for his occupation, and just randomly this self-storage opportunity came in front of him. He had never looked at self-storage, started pursuing it, started considering it, and all of a sudden the Lord led him to buy a self-storage unit. It's been a tremendous investment for him. So don't put God in a box. Don't limit God and say, well, I'm not sure about commercial real estate, or guys, I'd be open to it all. I'd be open to a retirement account. I'd be open to residential. I'd be open to multifamily commercial. I'd be open to gold. I would be open to anything that has significant value that appreciates over time. That's an asset. We can get even more specific now. Like let's take industrial for an example. One of the types of industrial is office warehouse. You might say, hey, I need 2 or 3 offices. Let's say you have a window washing business. You need 2 or 3 offices for your front office staff, but then you want to park, let's say 4 or 5 vans or trucks inside at night. That's an office warehouse component. You get warehouse where you're storing things. You get distribution where you're shipping things out, manufacturing, flex lab. This one here, yard or outside fence storage. One of the very first landlords that I did work for in the industrial space, his whole business model was industrial real estate, and he would go and buy like the most down and dirty properties, the properties that you would drive up to and be like, who would want this? And he understood industrial real estate. He became an expert in industrial real estate, and he went after investments that no one else understood. And this guy today has $150, $200 million worth of real estate that he owns. And one of the properties he purchased, he bought this piece of ground, and Martin Marietta, one of the large concrete companies in Colorado, came to him. They wanted to lease a couple yards for a concrete batch plant, and he did a lease. This is like 15, 18 years ago. He was doing a couple acre yard lease for like $15,000 a month. Just a random piece of industrial ground, and they took the back portion. He still had the front portion for the main investment use that he wanted. And so here's a piece of ground that looks like it has no value. It's 2 acres, and he's getting a $12,000, $13,000, $14,000, $15,000 per month payment on it for nothing. And they fenced it in, they built the batch plant, et cetera. They maintained it. So there's a lot of different things that once you become aware of these investment opportunities, the Lord can start speaking to you. It's very hard to hear in an area or a realm where you have no understanding. Again, you don't have to become an expert in every area, but it'd be helpful if you knew a little bit about gold. It'd be helpful if you knew a little bit about mutual funds, or if you knew what's going on in the S&P 500 versus some other investment, all right? We talk about retail. Retail is probably the most obvious. I mentioned it before. You get, banks, restaurants, salons. Again, I work in healthcare. A third of the work that I do in healthcare is in retail properties, and then 2/3 are in office properties. Healthcare providers, as you've been seeing over the last 15, 20 years, keep popping up in retail. They like the exposure. They like the synergy of other tenants. And so you're seeing dentists, physicians, veterinarians popping up in all these retail properties. It's a very, very exciting asset class for a lot of these healthcare providers. Auto repair shops, large national retailers, et cetera. I don't want to get too far off in the weeds, and I'm going to get more practical in a second. I'm just trying to give you guys a quick overview as far as how commercial real estate works. But there's no defined lease structure for commercial properties. If we're talking residential, there is a single state-approved residential purchase contract. And you can have attorneys draft contracts if there's an acceptance there and an acknowledgement between attorneys, but 99.9% of every residential purchase in Colorado and in almost every state has a state-drafted, state-approved form. You guys can go to DORA, the Department of Regulatory Agency's website. You can get any contract that they have for anything that you need. And if it's a purchase for residential or commercial, it's a state-authorized, state-approved contract. When it comes to leases in commercial real estate, there's no such thing. And so you could do 100 deals. Early on in commercial real estate, you guys have probably picked up, I'm a scrapper and I like to grind, and I got after it at a very high level. My first 100 deals I did in real estate, I didn't see the same lease twice unless it was the same landlord. You can get a 20-page lease, an 8-page lease, an 80-page lease. I remember showing up to one property. We negotiated terms of this property for this client in a huge, we call it a power center, where it had a Whole Foods and a Super Target and so forth. And the client had maybe not the best attorney. And we get this lease, it was a 125-page lease, and the attorney just ran away screaming, okay? The attorney told the client, you can't do this deal. This is too crazy of a lease, and killed this deal that we've been working on for 6 months. Now we found another tenant, and they got married and went on a vacation, honeymoon. It was a happy ending, okay? But you can see these crazy leases in commercial real estate that are very, very different. One of the biggest things to understand in commercial real estate is questions like, who's paying for what? If the HVAC unit, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning unit on the roof goes out, are you cutting a $30,000 check, or is the landlord cutting that check for you? Who's paying for utilities? Who's paying for janitorial? These are all things that you learn as you start looking at different asset classes. And I have this asterisk here. If you're doing a commercial lease, you're going to probably have an attorney involved. Is that an additional expense to a transaction in commercial real estate? Absolutely. But it's like having insurance on your car or your house. It's money that's very well spent. Because there's no standard form, you need to protect yourself. And you should read the commercial leases. You should become maybe not an expert, but pretty well informed in them. But you still want to have an attorney because the laws change constantly. So you might say, well, hey, Colin, it's a little confusing right now, the different uses, the specialties. There's a lot going on with commercial real estate, the rent structures, all these things. It seems a little complex. It's not much more complex than understanding what happens in the S&P 500 or understanding a gold index. Again, if you spend a little bit of time with it, you'll start to pick on it really quickly. But you might say, well, if it is more complex than residential, why would I consider that for an investment? And here are the reasons why. Number one, it's common and it's typical for there to be long-term leases. In residential, a standard lease might be a year, maybe 2 years. It's very rare to see a lease in residential that goes longer than that. And a lot of apartment complexes these days are doing 6-month terms, 3-month terms, right? Commercial real estate, a short lease would be considered for 5 years. And so you could have a residential property that over a period of 15 years, you have to release to 7 or 8 different tenants. And you might have a commercial property where you do one lease with one tenant, either for a 10 or 12 or 15-year term, or they're there for 15 years. That's a great place to be. So long-term leases are a very favorable aspect of commercial real estate. Another aspect is that tenants typically invest their own money into these spaces. So a lot of times these are more expensive investments, but you'll find businesses and corporations or healthcare practices where I spend most of my time, and these people will come in there and pump hundreds of thousands of dollars into these spaces. And it's the concept of having skin in the game. It's very rare in residential to have someone upgrade or improve your property. Getting a tenant in a residential property to change the air filter is considered monumental for a lot of residential landlords. You'll never believe it. Not only did they change the filter, they bought it from Home Depot. Now, they bought the wrong filter and put it in backwards, but at least they tried, right? In commercial real estate, the vast majority of clients we work with, they pump hundreds of thousands of dollars into these spaces. It's very favorable because that's their money maker. That's their occupation and their income, all right? They're very, very favorable. You get credit tenants too. If you get a healthcare provider in a space, as an example, they have less than a 1% default rate across the major healthcare spectrum. And here's the reality. When times get tough, as an example for healthcare and medical, when times get tough, I've been through 2 major recessions, plus like the dip of COVID, et cetera. A dentist doesn't decide to, sell his dental practice and become a landscaper. He's gonna figure out a way to get through the downtime. He's gonna figure out a way to be lean. He's gonna figure a way to get back on top of things. And so you get these business owners, they're scrappy. They're not gonna go out of business unless they have to. They're gonna work as hard as they possibly can. Whereas a lot of times in residential, times get tough, they'll just move out real quickly. Now, I'm a big fan of residential, single family. I'm a big fan of multifamily. I'm a big fan of commercial, all right? Another concept is that most leases in commercial are structured with the tenants paying their proportionate share of the operating costs. So this last year, if anyone lives in Colorado, you know that Colorado was so gracious to all of its citizens that they came through and put a 30 to 50% increase on property taxes for every residential property in Colorado. And then they have the audacity to send you like $1,000 refund and tell you how hard they're working for you. What a scam. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that I probably shouldn't quote, but I will. It says, "When I die, please don't let me vote Democrat." And now back to the regular scheduled program. A 50% increase in property taxes in 1 year? Where in the heck do you find the basis for that? There was a 30% operating cost increase for commercial properties as well. We own a property for our office space in Lone Tree, and the taxes alone are $40,000 or $10 a square foot just for the taxes alone. $40,000 for a 4,000 foot space, and it's actually only 3,200 square feet of usable space. Crazy. Anyways, in commercial properties though, those expenses are passed to the tenants, and most leases are structured where the tenants absorb those increases, another benefit. If your property taxes go up in residential, it's very unlikely that the tenant's gonna pay that increase. You might renegotiate the lease when the lease comes up, but you're absorbing those costs as the owner in most residential transactions. And then this last part that I wanna put in here, there's an ability to deploy more capital. And so you can get to the place where a lot of people do get to, where you want to put more money into real estate. You might say, listen, I own a couple residential properties, but I want to deploy $300,000, $400,000 and buy $1.5 million building or a larger property. I don't want to go buy 4 or 5 regular single family houses. I want to buy one property with one tenant or 2 tenants. Commercial real estate allows you to deploy more capital, especially in multifamily. There's a lot of opportunities for you to take money and put it into a larger investment. Now, a couple of you guys might now be saying, well, hey, I'm just getting started and this seems really, really complex. There's people in this room right now that heard me talk on commercial real estate a year or 2 ago who said, let's take a look at that one, and have stepped out and have purchased their first property or 2 or 3. And all of a sudden, just like maybe you never owned gold before, or maybe you never owned this other asset class before, all of a sudden you do. You become familiar with it. You get comfortable. There's a grace and an anointing on what you put your hand to. Doors start opening. You start meeting the people that you need to meet in that area. So again, don't put yourself in a box on this one. I'm going to be speaking tomorrow on how to scale in real estate, by the way. How do you actually go from having a desire to purchase real estate, and how do you actually start buying real estate assets, properties, etc.? It's very, very simple. And you don't have to leave your occupation. You don't have to leave your career or your company, etc. You can do it in addition to what you do, right? That's the number one strategy, by the way, too. My strategy is not leave your occupation and become a full-time real estate investor. My personal recommendation is start becoming so successful in your occupation that you can start setting aside margin or additional income and revenue per month or per year, and then you start buying a property maybe once a year or once every other year or once every 3 years. You do that for 10, 15, 20 years and you'll be a multimillionaire in real estate. And I have a number of people that I don't officially mentor people, but I've had the privilege of sharing with a handful of people over time. And I'm like, what would it look like for you to buy one property this year, one property next year? And I know a number of people that have started doing that, and all of a sudden they own 3, 4, 5 properties, and they've gone up in value, and they have equity, and they've found great tenants and so forth. So commercial real estate, a lot of upsides. And then this last one, if you own a business or you have an income under an entity. So I'm in commercial real estate. Most commercial real estate agents operate as a sole proprietor, or they have an LLC or an S Corp. If you have an income under a business, you can purchase commercial real estate for your business. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Financing, a couple other differences. Commercial real estate financing, it's not typically 30 years. You can find a lender every once in a while that will do a 30-year deal, but a standard loan in commercial real estate is 15 to 20 years. Now, the beauty of that is that you're paying down principal at a very fast rate. I have a commercial property that I own that pays down $55,000 per year in principal. I put it on a 15-year term, got a great interest rate on it, and every month that check goes out or comes in, and every month there is $4,500 getting paid down in principal, and it goes up every month, as you guys know if you looked at an amortization schedule. So a 15-year, 20-year term, beautiful. If you can afford 15, 20-year term in your residential too, don't get locked into this mindset that I need to do 30 years. Run an amortization schedule and look at what it would be if you had a 15 or 20-year note on that. A lot of people stretch it out as far as they possibly can to afford the largest house or the most expensive house, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I've done that on numerous occasions. But if you can get into a 15-year, 20-year term, and you can start paying down serious principal on that, that can be a tremendous investment. You can get to 25 years on SBA. Couple other differences. If you're talking investment real estate, it usually does require a little bit higher down payment, 20, 25% versus residential can be a little bit lower than that. They'll ask you to have operating reserves, like in case you do need a new roof or a new parking lot, they want to make sure that you have the money to pay for those things. They'll ask for debt to income ratios, net worths, and so forth. But every one of those is manageable. If you can't afford a certain level, you just drop the price, and you can buy commercial real estate for $400,000, $500,000. I could drive you through Woodland Park right now and say that building could be bought for $400,000, that could be bought for $6,000, that could be bought for $8,000. There's real estate all over the place. This concept here of depreciation is one that a lot of people don't understand, but depreciation involves tax deductions and tax benefits. And so what depreciation means in the form of real estate is that the government says we can take the value of the property minus the land, because the land's not going anywhere, and we can say that that building is going to depreciate or lower in cost over time, theoretically, even though they don't, they go up in value. But from a tax perspective, the government says if you buy a residential property, we can depreciate it over 27 and a half years. So if you had a property that was worth $275,000 for the house or the building, not including the land, over 27 and a half years, that's $10,000 they'd give you in a tax deduction every year. All right? Now, if you sell the property and don't exchange it into another property, you will have to, account for those tax deductions and level up in the future if you just sell the property and cash in the gains. But the government also lets us do a thing called a 1031 exchange, where you can sell the property, you can transfer into another property and avoid paying the capital gains on that property. The reason this is so important is because when you own commercial real estate or residential real estate, between the deductions that you get for interest write-offs or operating expenses, or in this case, depreciation, in the vast majority of scenarios, it can wipe out all of your taxable income, and you can find yourself in a position where all the income you're receiving in the property is tax-free. And so you get to depreciate the property over again 27 and a half or 39 years, and you get these deductions worth tens of thousands of dollars. And if those deductions offset the income on those properties, you find yourself in a position where you can own a couple of properties on the side that's 100% tax-free. And these properties historically will appreciate or increase in value on a monthly basis. And you get massive tax deductions for owning commercial real estate in a business setting. And then you have cash flow from the real estate as well. When I'm underwriting a real estate investment, I'm looking at things very specifically. I care about the cash flow, there's no question, but in an interest rate driven market where you're seeing the rates we've seen, cash flow is not king. For me, it's what's the overall return on my capital investment in the deal. And typically that's gonna be driven by depreciation and tax deductions. If I could buy a piece of property that just even broke even, which I've done that in the last 2 years, and it had no cash flow, but it broke even and paid for itself, but I picked up $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in tax deductions on top of that per year to offset my main income sources, that's a killer return on your investment as the property is increasing in value. So we'll talk more about depreciation here in a few minutes, but I'm telling you right now, if you get nothing else from this seminar, you'll know two things. One, I love a beautiful sports jacket, okay? And just kidding. And two, depreciation has the ability to change the game. If you have a company that can purchase capital equipment or technology and you can depreciate that or bonus depreciate it, it's a tremendous strategy, all right? So you should know what depreciation is. Oh, that's the next slide. Who knew? Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. There's a thing called cost segregation studies or cost seg studies. These are done by engineering firms or CPA firms. And what these mean are people will come into the property that you've purchased or that you own, and they'll look at all of the assets. They'll look at the carpet, the drywall, the wood floors, the stairs, everything inside the house or the property, and they'll start putting each asset into a classification. Is it 5-year property? Is it 7-year property? Or is it 15-year property? And any property that goes into 5, 7, or 15 years can be bonus depreciated over 5 years. All right? This is the same thing if you buy an automobile or a tractor for your work or something else. You can depreciate it over 5 years. Well, the last couple of years, we've had a thing called bonus depreciation where for years, you could write off 100% of the bonus depreciation in year one. If it was 5, 7, or 15-year property, you could write off 100% of it in year one. All right? Now, it was 80% last year. It's 60% this year. Congress did vote to renew the bonus depreciation schedule. The Senate has not passed it yet. It's been sitting there since February. I hope and pray they do because it'd be a tremendous just jumpstart for the economy for anyone who understands how to use depreciation to make or save money. But even right now, if you were to buy an automobile or equipment or technology or buy a piece of real estate, you could take however much property you can get in the 5, 7, or 15-year category. You can take 60% of that in year one, and then the remaining 40% gets divided over the next 4 years. And most people will tell you, most cost seg companies will tell you that they can get about 60% of a property's value into 5, 7, or 15-year property. So if you were to go out there and you were to take $200,000 and buy $1 million property, you could get a $600,000 write-off and you could take 60% of that, $360,000 in year one, and the remaining $240,000, so $60,000 over the next 4 years. You get a $600,000 tax deduction in the first 5 years. The people that understand how to play the game of real estate, like Billy, know how to create significant wealth, and they know how to do it in a tax-deferred. They might say tax-free, you gotta be careful, it's a tax-deferred concept. Now, did I just so we're really clear, I didn't say anyone needs to leave their occupation. Nobody needs to sell the farm. And what you need to do, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, is we need to find a way to start creating enough margin to where we can buy real estate. And we need to be open to what the Lord's saying. Is it commercial? Is it residential? Is it land? What does it look like? Because there's a lot of reasons to want to buy and own real estate. So cost seg studies, bonus depreciation, if you just Google those concepts, you can find a lot of information. So you can take that 39-year depreciation schedule in commercial and you can get 60, 70% of that property's value into the first 5 years. And then here's another strategy. You hold the property for 2 or 3 years, you sell it, you do a 1031 exchange into another property, and then you get that 60% of that property's value back into that 5-year category, and you get another monster tax deduction. And if you can't use it all in 1 year, you can carry it forward if you have the real estate designation. I don't want to get too technical right now, but there's a lot of things you can do with real estate and depreciation to dramatically reduce your taxable income. Consult your accountant and attorney. All right, so people ask me all the time, hey, where can I go to get good terminology? Our website, unless you're a healthcare provider, won't do you a lot of good as far as our services, but we do have some really great resources. If you want to become more educated when it comes to terminology or frequently asked questions or glossary concepts, I don't know of a better place than what we have. And so if you want to get a little bit more education here, it's a great place to go. Go to the resources, go to the glossary, etc. All right, let's talk about operating expenses for a second, because when you do purchase commercial real estate, sometimes there's nothing different than residential, but as we develop with more specialized building codes and higher requirements for developing commercial properties, you do find additional expenses. If you're in a climate that has snow, you'll have snow removal. I have a guy that I know that builds large retail buildings. He built like 30, 40 Walgreens. And he built the Walgreens up in Steamboat Springs, which is a mountain town, for most of you guys know that. in Steamboat, the year they finished it, Steamboat had a record snowfall. And I don't want to over-exaggerate the number, but it was somewhere around $200,000 in snow removal the first year. And Walgreens called him and was like, what's going on? He's like, I don't control the weather in Steamboat. So if you have a property and there's snow removal, you want to be very careful to make sure you know who's paying for it, right? Snow removal, maintenance for fire safety, sprinklers, elevators, signage, all these things come into play in commercial. You just want to make sure you have a lease structure that either lets you know you're going to be paying for it if it breaks, or it's going to get passed through to the tenants proportionally. It's just important to know how they're structured. Cost of transactions, you should have an attorney involved in every commercial transaction, in my personal opinion, unless you've got a really great lease that's been worked out and you're really comfortable. Commissions, you're going to pay commissions in commercial real estate. It's rare to pay commissions in residential leasing, but it's 99% of residential transactions have commissions being paid. Commercial operates the same way, and it's typically paid by the landlord or the seller. So just like residential, it's very common to have the owner of a house have a commission set aside for their agent and then the buyer's agent. Commercial real estate operates the same way. You're going to offer a commission to your agent to list the property for you for lease or sale, and then you're going to also offer a commission for a buyer or tenant's agent to bring you a quality tenant. And that's just the cost of transaction. If you can get a good lease for 7, 10, 12 years in your property, that's money well spent. Tenant improvement allowance, very common to help pay a portion of the build out. Capital improvements, it's very common to secure a 10-year or 12-year or 15-year deal that you're going to contribute a portion of the deal. And the question is, what's the break-even time frame on your capital investment? So I'm going to show you guys a quick example of a deal. This is a retail space. I've done deals where there's no money spent whatsoever, right? I've also done deals where there's a lot more money spent than this. In residential, you get to where you understand what it takes to do a deal. Let's say you have a single family house and it sits vacant for 2 or 3 months. You know that cost is on you to carry the payments during that time. If the tenant comes up and they say, hey, we need you to paint the walls or you need to change the carpet or what have you, you understand the expenses involved in doing a residential transaction. Here's what commercial looks like. If you had a 2,000-foot retail space and it was being marketed at $24 per square foot, and I haven't said that yet, but that's how commercial real estate is marketed. It's marketed on a per square foot basis per year. So it's $24 a square foot per year. So if you want to find the monthly cost, you have to divide it by 12. California does it per square foot per month because California is weird. I don't know. I don't have another excuse for it. Okay. So if you're in California, people are like, yeah, the lease rate was $2 a square foot. Everywhere else, it'd be $24 a square foot. So if it took you 3 months to find a tenant, that'd be $12,000 of carrying payments while you're getting the space leased up. Once the tenant shows up, if they want to do a build out for a restaurant or for anything, it'll probably take them 6 months to go through the building department, get a permit, and then actually finish the space out by swinging hammers, erecting drywall, et cetera. So you might have another, $24,000 of carrying costs during the build out. Very few tenants are going to pay rent if they're not actually occupying and open for business. Then they might say, hey, we need you to pay for some of the tenant improvements. You might cut a check for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to secure a long-term lease. A couple thousand in attorney's fees, depends on the commission. And so this is an example. This deal is a $100,000 deal. However, once you become equipped in commercial real estate, a lot of lenders will float that money to you and just put it back into your loan. And so once you get enough equity in commercial properties, they'll give you the money to do these deals so that you put nothing out of pocket from a cash perspective once you get established. Or you could just say, hey, I'm going to inject $100,000 in this deal because I'm going to get $800,000 back in rent over the next 10 years. All right, let's talk about cap rates. Cap rates or capitalization rate, this is another just kind of fundamental investor concept that whether you're in real estate or not, you should know what it means. Just like you should understand depreciation, that should be a foundational staple of your professional savvy. Understand what a cap rate is along the same lines, right? So again, if nothing else today, cap rates, cost seg studies, et cetera, bonus depreciation, those are things that are going to put you in a position to capitalize if the opportunity comes. So a cap rate is one of the primary ways that people will value investment real estate. You can value real estate in three primary ways, as anyone who's been involved in real estate knows. You can say, well, what's the cost? What does it cost to build it? What's the replacement cost? You know, if a tornado knocked down a building, what would it cost me to replace it? Insurance companies are always looking at replacement cost. Because if it does get flooded or blown over or burns up, we got to pay to rebuild it. Replacement cost is a very common way of analyzing or appraising properties, right? The next one, which is the most common, is going to be, what are comparable properties selling for? Well, if it's a vacant single-family home or a home that's being sold to another family, what you do in residential is you just go into the neighborhood and you can see what every single person in that neighborhood paid for their house. I think most of you guys probably know that right now, but you can go to the county assessor website in almost every jurisdiction and you can pull up what they bought their house for. And if it's private online, you can go to the county commissioner's office or the assessor's office, or you can have a title company pull what's called an O&E, an ownership and encumbrance report, and they'll tell you how much they paid for it, who they got their loan from, what the interest rate is, how much down payment. You can get all that information when it comes to sales. In leases, it's not typically published, and so it becomes a lot more challenging to figure out. That's why we have cap rates in commercial real estate. So we have to figure out, if it's a leased property, you know, what's the value of it? It's going to be based upon its income. And so this is the third approach. It's the investment approach. If I were to purchase a property and pay cash for it, what would my rate of return be? Capitalization rate or cap rate? So here's an example, and here's the equation. You take the net operating income, all right? What does the property yield to you after you factor in some of the expenses, et cetera? What does the property yield to you? And if you paid cash for it, what would your rate of return be? So if you had a property that paid you around $4,200 per month and it was approximately $50,000 per year, that would be your net operating income if you had no debt on it. It's before debt, before your tax brackets, et cetera. You take that income and you divide it by the value that you think is real or the purchase price, and that gives you a cap rate. So in this case, $50,000 a year net operating income divided by a $600,000 purchase price or a value price gives you a cap rate of 8.3%. Or another way to say it, if I bought a $600,000 property for cash with no debt, it would net me 8.3% of my money every year. Now, the reality is, for most real estate, you are going to leverage it, right? I'm not going to talk in great detail right now, but almost every time we talk on real estate, there'll be a number of people that will say, well, I thought it's ungodly to borrow money. And they'll quote, owe no one anything except for your love. Well, number one, the example given this morning from Karen, what did Elisha tell the widow to do? Go borrow as many vessels as you possibly can. Is it sin to borrow? No. Not on a surface value. Do you know how many different guidelines and regulations there are in the Old Testament of if you lend and when you lend, do it this way, and here's the rules and regulations? So there are concepts, and I could go way deeper than that when it comes to borrowing money. There's the difference between borrowing money to buy a flat screen TV or a pair of Jordan tennis shoes versus buying an asset that increases in value, that is an income producing depreciation machine that helps increase your net worth, that allows you to give more money into the kingdom, to be more effective in your community, in your church, et cetera, et cetera. It's called an investment versus just an expense. There is bad debt. I wouldn't go in debt to buy a television. I wouldn't do that, right? But I would go into debt to purchase an asset like commercial real estate or residential real estate, because it's just that, it's an asset. And then you get into the concept of leveraging as well too, all right? So hopefully that takes care of it. I can go really deep on the concept of borrowing money and is it godly or is it sinful, et cetera. And the short answer is it's not, right? Jesus himself talked about it. There's a lot we could say. We'll keep moving on this one, okay? All right, and then this is the thing that's interesting. The lower the cap rate, the higher the price. So this is one that kind of works opposite the way you think. You think the higher the cap rate, the higher the price. So you see a property being advertised for a 10 cap. That means if you pay cash, you get a 10% return. But the higher the cap rate, the lower the price, okay? The lower the cap rate, the higher the price. And so you'll see institutional investments today where people will go and they'll develop a Chick-fil-A or a Starbucks, a standalone retail building. They'll put a 15-year lease on that, and they'll have it at like a 4 or 5% cap rate. That's a tougher investment to make work. You're going to have to put down a large amount of down payment to make that thing cash flow. But if you're talking about true mailbox money, it's going to be backed by Chick-fil-A corporate or Starbucks or Chipotle, and there's a pretty high probability that that check's hitting your mailbox or the digital currency is hitting your bank account every month for the next 180 months, et cetera. So there's people out there right now that will say, look, I need to deploy a certain amount of capital to offset my income. Commercial real estate provides me an avenue to do that. And I'm gonna go buy one property with one tenant backed by a Fortune 500 company. It's not gonna be the highest return you've ever seen, but it's gonna kick off some monster tax deductions. This question always comes up. People say, all right, Colin, you whet my appetite. Where could I go to start finding properties or start just doing some due diligence? And I've got basically 4 websites you can go to. The last one's CoStar. That is a paid subscription. I don't think any of you are probably going to need to do that. It's $4,000 or $5,000 a year just for one person's license, so I don't think it's necessary. CoStar does own LoopNet, and the vast majority of LoopNet is supposedly on CoStar, although I don't think it is all the time. So LoopNet's a great place to start. So if I typed in LoopNet Woodland Park, I can pull up properties for lease or for sale, and I can start looking at options that are in the market. Now, no database has all the properties. So then if I go to Crexi and I create an account on Crexi and I type in Woodland Park for sale, all of a sudden here comes another 8 or 10 properties that LoopNet didn't have. And I'm starting to get a pretty good understanding of what the market's looking like in Woodland Park, as an example. 10X is an auction website that's a little bit more sophisticated for you. But again, no different than you looking at the stock app on your iPhone. You're just starting to get more information and seeing what's going on. So these property search websites are a fantastic place to go to get information. All right, so where to start? I'm gonna give you guys one area to start if you own a business or if you have an income through an entity. And then tomorrow during my breakout, I'll go through the full game plan as far as what it looks like. I'm gonna give you guys one area right now. If you own a business, you can get owner-occupied or owner-user financing for your business. So whether you have a window washing company or you do Turo and you lease vehicles at the airport, or you're in real estate and you have an entity that the commissions come to, you have the ability to qualify for owner-user real estate. This is the #1 way people get involved in commercial real estate, by the way. Now, your next statement to me is gonna say, well, I don't need an office space. And I'm gonna tell you that has nothing to do with owning commercial real estate. Because you can purchase the real estate for your business and then still have an address there or show up there once every 10 years, but you can decide to sublease the property out or lease it out to another entity or another business. The vast majority of people I know that got involved in commercial real estate, their first property they purchased was through an entity or a business that they owned. It's a great way to do it. So you could go buy a retail building or an industrial building. If you have any components to industrial, if you're in construction, if you're in landscaping, if you're in window washing, if you're in power washing, if you have any business, any industrial component, I'm telling you right now, even though you haven't looked in these areas, the amount of people that need industrial space is off the charts. Industrial is a market segment that people don't have a lot of exposure to if you're not driving around those areas, but you'll drop off the expressway, turn right, turn left, and all of a sudden you'll see 15 industrial buildings that you had no clue were even there, and there are hundreds and hundreds of industrial tenants that need office or that need industrial space. So if you have, we have a commercial real estate firm and we have 100 and some agents. I know a half dozen of them that went and bought an office space or a work share space, and they drop in there once in a while and they rent the rest of it out. And they've got properties that cash flow hundreds or thousands of dollars per month. And they didn't really need one, but it was a great reason to buy one. And all of a sudden they've got more exposure here. And so if you own a business and you have an income in an entity or as a sole proprietor but through a business, or if you're in real estate getting paid commissions through your entity, you can qualify for owner-user financing, which could be 10% down, 20 at the most, and there's programs you get in for even less. Great way to do it. I'll stop there as far as that concept, but I would tell you that I would highly recommend you think about that. Now, with this, we're not talking about jumping on the first property you see. All right, it's very common to get excited. You hear something, I love the zeal, I really do. but you want to have wisdom with it too. So it's not the last helicopter out of Vietnam, okay? No one's leaving you in country for the rest of your life. There's going to always be another deal. There's a rule in real estate that says do not fall in love with the property lest you get left at the altar, okay? It's great to get excited. It's great to have a passion. It's great to even say, I believe God wants me to own this property, but you've got to play it level-headed. You've got to stay cool with it because God has a very hard time telling you what you should or shouldn't do or what's coming or why you might want to avoid something when you're not listening because you're obsessed with buying your first property or getting this asset, all right? So go into it, just say, Lord, increase my peace, increase my desire. Help me to take the right steps, help me to meet the right people, help me to get the right financing, whatever it might be, but don't force it, okay? The next thing is, if you don't own a business or you're not sure where it is, just start researching properties. Go to Crexi and start looking at what would it look like if I were to buy a property that's occupied by a salon suites company on a 10-year absolute net investment, and what does absolute net even mean? What does it look like if I were to look at self-storage units? If I drive 24 back to Colorado Springs, there's 2 self-storage units that are for sale right now. If I drive 24 from here and go back to Colorado Springs, I can tell you that there's 30 plus properties for sale right now. What happens is you just start becoming perceptive of things. You start picking up on things. You call it kind of the real estate mindset. For me personally, I like this idea. I drive a different way home or a different way to get there as much as I possibly can. And I'm always looking around and I'm always listening. Now, I'm not going to spend 45 minutes if it's a 5-minute drive if I can get there faster, but you start paying attention to things. Have you started it yet, sir? Have you started it yet? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Become an expert in a specific property type. Evaluate investment groups. There's a lot of investment groups. There's a number of them in Colorado Springs where these guys pick off 15, 20 properties per year, and you can get involved in investing in them. They kick out on average 14, 15, 16% returns, and there's sophisticated groups that do all the due diligence. I have a buddy that's a major part of one of them. He's done like 45 multifamily and self-storage investments. He's never lost $1 in it. And I'm not stamping that as an approval, but there's a lot of groups out there that are always looking for capital. And so you might say, well, I only have $50,000. It's not enough to buy the property that I want. You can get exposure to these groups that purchase real estate. You can get around these guys that know what they're doing, that have been doing it for decades, that are super savvy. And you can start to get involved in owning commercial real estate by being a part owner in a syndication. It's another great way to do it. One of the wealthiest guys that I know, it's one of my top friends, he's made the vast majority of his wealth by just putting in 50 or 100 grand at a time in these properties. And it wasn't until a few years ago that he bought his first investment property. And he doesn't do real estate for a living. He does something else for a living. He takes the margin that he creates by being successful in his business, actually working for someone else, by the way, too, not even his business, okay? And then takes the money and invests it in real estate through professional groups. And he did the first one, and he turned 50 into 80. Did the next one, turned 100 into 200. He's done 45, 50 investments now. And that's where he's created the vast majority. He's worth tens of millions of dollars. He's created that money, and he was never the guy putting the deal together, never the guy signing on the dotted line, never the guy guaranteeing a single thing. A lot of ways to get involved in real estate. And that just happened to come across his desk one day. The Lord breathed on it for him, and that's how he got in. So evaluate investment groups. And then in closing, guys, I've said this, I really do hope you guys have picked up on it. If you've not ever looked at owning real estate, for its residential or commercial, I'm not here pushing commercial real estate because there's some desire to push it. I'm just telling you, if you're not looking at it, I think that's crazy. Karen showed the stats as far as people with net worth and millionaires and all these things. You can get there without real estate. I don't know why you would. To me, this is the equivalent of riding a donkey to work versus driving a car. Well, it just feels so right. Commercial real estate, residential real estate, investing, this is all part of stewardship. And you might say, well, I don't feel led to be an investor. I don't feel led to be a steward. You don't have a choice. You've been placed in the position of stewardship. And I made it clear earlier, God's very interested in you stewarding the talents and the abilities and the finances and the relationships that he's given you. I'm not telling you to force an investment, but I am telling you to open your heart a little further and say, Lord, are you leading me in any other directions right now? whether it's to start a side hustle or a business, or whether it's just to start investing. Maybe he wants to take your job, your career, and bless it to where you put out an extra $50,000, $100,000 a year, and you start investing that over the next 20, 30 years. You've got tens of millions of dollars worth of money in investments in gold or in the S&P 500 or mutual funds or whatever in real estate. A lot of ways to get there. And then the quote that I used earlier, I love this John C. Maxwell quote, leaders develop daily, not in a day. And it's the same for everything. Fathers develop daily, not in a day. Husbands develop daily, not in a day. Investors develop daily, not in a day. Show me a person who's willing to commit to their professional development for even 20 to 30 minutes a day in the area of real estate or leadership or any other area over a compounded period of time, and I guarantee you that person will be winning at a higher level than they were previously. There's no other conclusion. Last, guys, I'm going to give you guys this. People have already asked me, hey, how do we get more information on real estate? Billy does have an event coming up in Lone Tree, October 11th, 12th, and 13th. And I'm going to tell you something that I didn't ask them if I could tell you. They lose money on almost every one of these events. It's very rare they break even on these events. They're not doing this to make money. They truly have a passion of helping to empower people. I have a company, it's commercial real estate. And we brought people into our company and helped them grow their income 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, et cetera. I had a period of 5, 6 years where I received 0 for doing that. 0. And every year I get up and it's like, Lord, or every day for a season as we're scaling your building, it's like, this isn't about me. I've got mine. You've blessed me. It's time for me to help other people to be blessed as well too. You've led me into the promised land. How can we help lead more people into the promised land? And that truly is Becky and Billy's heart. That truly is Andrew and Jamie's heart. It's Dave and Karen's heart. So if you have a desire to do more in real estate, here's a great next step. If you have a desire to get mentored, sign up for the Wealth Builders podcast, their emails. They put out content weekly. It's super rich. I can tell you this, having been involved in commercial real estate for a couple of decades, I learn something significant at every conference that I go to. I personally wouldn't miss one because I know God has something for me. If I told you, hey, if you come to this conference, God will give you $1 million, someone's gonna give you $1 million check, you'd show up real quickly. I believe I've gotten way more than that at every conference that I've been at. So with that in closing, guys, thank you, live stream. I hope you guys were blessed by this. Hopefully this gives you, again, a starter position, a one-on-one course on commercial real estate. We're gonna do a 15-minute break, and then Dave Metcalf's coming out to teach on how to build an orchard with the Triple X Factor. So thank you, guys.